Packard Enterprises and Intel present Byte Talks, powered by CNBC TV 18.
The BFSI sector is presently in the midst of a profound transformation, with the industry preparing to embrace the next major phase of digital transformation. Despite that, India's BFSI sector is tackling a growing number of challenges as digital technologies, digital startups, and changing customer expectations forces the industry to adapt. And cloud computing has emerged as the key enabler of enterprise business transformation, but along with its challenges. To discuss the changing regulatory requirements and emerging concerns about data privacy, data egress costs, and the way forward, we are now joined by Vikram K, the Senior Director, Industry Vertical at HPE, Samir Fukan, the Director, Vertical Sales at Intel, Mahesh Ramamurthy, CIO, Yes Bank, on HPE and Intel present Byte Talks, powered by CNBC TV 18. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining in. Vikram, my first question is to you. In the digital age, organizations are generating vast amount of data from myriad sources, but they must use this data in new and smarter ways to beat competition and drive a data-driven transformation from inside out. Now, HPE, as an industry leader and catalyst for change, what is HPE doing to accelerate the organization's digital transformation?
I guess, we've been through the first wave of modernization and becoming through the second wave of modernization, which is primarily the digital first modernization. And, everybody who's doing a digital first modernization will clearly do a data first modernization. This is what we are seeing. And most of it, as it's happening today, is happening from across the edge to the cloud. Since we are starting off on this premise that, a lot of data is getting created at the edge, there is bound to be a certain amount of disarray. There's bound to be a bit of rights and gravity around the data that is being generated, the volumes that are being generated, and all of this sort of perhaps adds to a whole lot of refinement in the way data is handled, progress across the organization, and handled in many ways. So we believe that data is a core asset, and what we have tried to do over the last 2 years and more perhaps is to kind of give a clear sense of how this can be handled using a very unified sort of fabric across the data platforms. What we do is we bring you a cloud, your way, with a unified cloud operations experience. So, I think some of the analysts call it the IT, R and O. We allow you a lot of control, and all of this is possible primarily because we've embarked on a vision, which is called the unified data operations or data ops. So, from when the data is created right down to when it is stored and operationalized, we have an asset that will provide you the portfolio, the product, the service, and all of that in a very unified manner. So these are some of the things that we've done. I think some which are inorganic in terms of acquisitions, some which are organic in terms of what HPE has developed over a period of time.
Mahesh, in a technology-driven transformation, data is the one ring that rules them all. And people, machines are generating data every second. Banks are recording million transactions and generating data every second. So organizations face the challenge of how do you manage and overcome your existing data silos. In order to facilitate this, efforts are being directed towards creating a data-driven architecture and ecosystem. In light of this, what are the challenges that banking institutions face and how does it affect them?
There is a lot of data that is getting generated, and especially in the banking industry where there are multiple lines of business, each of them engaging and interacting with customer across multiple touch points, whether it is in terms of onboarding them or providing services or possibly doing any payment capabilities that we have for there. So one of the big things that most of the banks, including Yes Bank, have gone about is attempting to bring together a complete data lake environment, which means that you first, in its own journey, is to create a data architecture where you bring a lot of the information together into a common repository first. And this common repository is in fact most pertinent for us to be able to get a lot of information across the various systems that engage with the customer or provide services. Once you have this data together, that's where you then create a lot of analytics apply intelligence across on top of it, and then enable that and make it available back again to the business in terms of enhancing their service capabilities. I think one of the big things that we are really realizing in this whole journey is that now the better and faster we harvest the information, and the more information, how we are able to create intelligence out of the information we have, I believe, and this is going to be the journey way forward of making the customer experience much better.
Samir, financial sector is facing multiple challenges these days, such as the changing business model, rising competition, pandemic-induced challenges, and also the changing requirements from customers as well. What are you hearing from CIOs in the financial services vertical on some of the challenges that they face?
COVID-19 is a black swan moment in the industry, specifically with respect to technology. And if you really look at the financial services industry, the digital transformation, which is kind of in its motion, suddenly took center stage. If you take in the context of India, we have a lot of large traditional banks who have had a particular process for running businesses. Now, when you bring in digital, different organizations had to demonstrate agility, flexibility. Where some of them went the way of doing it themselves, so there was a particular model to do that. Secondly, some had to go and embrace and work with these new age digital natives, cloud native startups, so they can embrace this, the technologies and options available to provide the best to the customer. Number two. What's number three? There was an explosion in the number of endpoint devices because everybody's now working from home. And by the way, we have a young India. Young India implies everybody's used to using the phone. So once digital was available, there was just a plethora of endpoints accessing the system, increasing the vulnerability and exposure to about risk, security, compliance, what have you. So there was just an issue about security and vulnerability and compliance, number three. And last but not the least, I touched upon the issue about what we call as ROI or cost, right? AI is everywhere. So the biggest thing for organizations to do beyond embracing the changes in technology to maintain the ROI was about monetizing their data. Data was no longer kind of something that they had to worry about, but it now became an asset to be able to use and monetize and run their business in a differentiated way. Now, if you take all this together, we at Intel, by the way, we're thrilled, are very excited about what it brings us, and we have been talking about it. We believe that this whole global expansion of the semiconductor demand or the semiconductor shortages you're seeing out there, it is driven out of four key superpowers. Four key superpowers. What do we talk about? Ubiquitous computing, pervasive connectivity, AI is everywhere, and the last but not the least is a cloud-to-edge infrastructure that supports that. Now think about it. When I talked about the work from home, the endpoint or the explosion of endpoint, it's about the whole conversation about ubiquitous computing. Right? Now, when I talked about monetization of data, it's all about AI everywhere. When you talk about the customer experience, and especially when the young generation using the tongue or using their phones or what have you, it is nothing but the pervasive connectivity that's enabling it to make it happen. Right? And last but not least, when you talk about the massive scale, the massive cost optimizations required, a massive amount of, the transactions, the number of people that India offers, the only operational model, I repeat that, the only operational model that's making it possible is actually the cloud.
Mahesh, where is it the maximum energy is channelized towards? All of us and all organizations need to prioritize. Is the priority right now about digitizing your core, your operations, or is it about using AI and ML to provide a superior customer experience which acts as a differentiator compared to other banks and fintechs? And where has Yes Bank reached in its digital transformation journey?
So the way Yes Bank is embarked upon its own game plan is we now have focused extensively in how we try to digitize our front-end capabilities and create better experiences for the customer in the onboarding and the service journeys. Now we are moving to what we call as platform journeys, platform capabilities. platforms not from a technology perspective, but platform more from a business architecture perspective. And also, at the same time, we also have the next pillar, which is essentially around that entire zero ops kind approach, which means that anything that we do from a digital capability perspective has to be at a straight through, obviously with the with the right levels of controls, but it has to be a straight through. And the back of all of this is the information from data perspective, data being the central and the customer being at the central of all of this. So which means that to your question, I think it is a combinational effect that we are working through at this moment in time, and do believe that's the right path to go with. And we do believe that a view of driving the customer experience has to be with the enablement of the digital and the digitization both coming together.
Hewlett Packard Enterprises and Intel present Byte Talks, powered by CNBC TV18. Hewlett Packard Enterprises and Intel present Byte Talks, powered by CNBC TV18.
Vikram, since organizations are dealing with vast amounts of transactions and data, it makes the attack surface very wide and varied. So security is a top priority for enterprises. So how can HPE help organizations that are trying to attain a level of data maturity, yet safeguard their data assets from security threats and fault-tolerant workloads?
One of the things that happens is collation of data. The second that happens is the faceting of data. And then there is just the putting to use by any organization for competitive purposes. So what we have embarked upon, as I mentioned earlier, is a data portfolio which is around data ops. And what we do there is offer the portfolio and services across storage, data lifecycle management, security, and data governance. So these four aspects actually completely cover all aspects of the data, from the creation, from when it's put to use, and what kind of governance models are prevailing, etc., etc. So as I mentioned earlier, Esmeralda, which is data fabric, is what we use largely for several things. We have acquired a company called Zerto, which does the IT resolutions and automation. So there's plenty of these elements of automation and elements of operations that kick in to facet data, to containerize applications, create microservices, so on and so forth. Of course, all of this is primarily done, as Mr. Mahesh was pointing out, that in a bank and in a manufacturing organization or in a telecom company, there are multiple businesses, and each business will have its own view, making data a sort of siloed in the past. But as you collate that information together and provide value over it in the form of information, then you need to have these structures prevalent that make data available, secure at all points of time, and those are the areas that HPE is focused on. So many new introductions, even from a data operationalizing data management and data operations perspective. Elytra is one such which is doing the rounds. But one of the good things that we are offering these days is the fact that this whole structure that I spoke to you about is no longer, because when people embark on a digital journey, there are many barriers to the journey, and one of them is obviously your capital expenditure. So one of the things that we've done is we bought this entire data ops platform into something called Green Lake, and all that a customer has to do is to consume this as he goes on service and keep increasing the number of services that you contract for. So and all of this is as you mentioned is in the realize the right security strategy, which is based around the zero trust architecture. So from the chip right down to what we do with the app, the data, we have a method and a product or a service that covers the entire spectrum of security.
Mahesh, as fintech companies grow in popularity, it's also forced the traditional banking systems to adapt and come up with innovative solutions to streamline the work of customers and facilitate transactions between all in the industry. It's forcing the big organizations to think like startups. How is fintech impacting the future of banking?
I think the way banks are now collaborating, and increasingly Yes Bank and a lot of other banks are looking at, is create a very, very strong, robust partnership models where each of the fintechs who essentially work in a very narrow band are being treated as extensions or can collaborate to provide services. So most of the fintechs, as you see, work in a very B2C space. But when you look at that and when you extend it to a financial realm of capabilities, the banking ecosystem can play a very, very significant and important role. So we are now, I think what's happening now is essentially banks are beginning to collaborate to create an entire partner ecosystem and hence create more outreach. As each of these fintech companies deepen in their engagement in a particular space, banks will start to have a plethora of capabilities. So which means when you get into a bank's environment, you now automatically are getting a two-way relationship. When you go to the front-end fintech, hey, you get all that capabilities with your money back in the bank and being secured. When you come into the bank, you automatically get, again, a lot of these services that these fintechs offer into the bank's mobile app or a bank's internet banking. So it's a two-way partnership that's emerging, and I do believe that there is going to be a structural shift with all the interaction that's happening, and that's essentially going to be the game forward. And that's going to change the banking landscape, it is going to change the risk landscape and the compliance landscape. So it's going to be interesting, and it's a good space to watch out for, with even the central banks starting to understand this better, with better regulations coming in and compliance expectations.
Samir, that brings me to my next question about cloud computing, which is the foundation and the forefront of technologies disrupting the financial services industry. Intel, along with partners like HPE, is investing heavily into cutting-edge technologies to help customers achieve extraordinary results, whether it's helping them scale, bring in operational efficiency, improving the customer interaction and experience, helping in security. Can you talk about some of the advances that are driving CIOs to hybrid cloud?
I'm sure most of the audience would have heard of, if not used, PayPal. They do 280 billion plus annually. Now, if you really look at digital payment, and India being one of the leading countries in digital payments, one of the areas that we're talking about is real-time fraud detection. Real-time fraud detection. So what we did with PayPal is we worked on an initiative which actually improved our SLA by 30%. By the way, let's be clear. When they talk about PayPal, it is one of the most, I would say, advanced IT users globally, right? And on that, we provide able to improve, the SLA by 30% in terms of the reduction of the number of false positives. So for the financial services industry, false positive is one of the key measures that we use, and reduction of 30% on PayPal was huge. With the technologies that we provided, PayPal was able to use or process 10 million data attributes in about 20 milliseconds, a 10x improvement in what they were able to use before. So that's what technology brings in. I'll click down a little bit more, but get a context. 280 billion plus payments annually, 30% improvement on their SLA, 10 million data attributes in 20 milliseconds. And by the way, along the process, a lot of people would assume that with this kind of thing, costs will increase. We are able to reduce their server footprint by about 15x. So net, great TCO, great performance, great outcome for the customer experience perspective. Now the question is, sure, how can you do more performance, better ROI, better experience, lower cost? It really comes down to the click down on the technology that you're talking about, right? And I'll start with the performance conversation first. If you really look at it, one of the critical technologies that was used in both the cases primarily in PayPal is something called Optane DC persistent memory. Whether you're talking about credit cards or digital payment, just massive amount of data, massive amounts, right? And has to do real-time processing. Okay, so if you go in for higher cost memory, it increases the cost. And if you take a lower cost memory, it impacts the performance. We actually introduced something called Optane DC persistent memory. It adds large amounts of capacity at minimal cost and has data persistence. And that's not all. What you're going to see come up, shipping, this quarter, is Intel Sapphire Rapids, as you may have heard about. The biggest leap in data center capabilities in a decade. We are bringing in the next generation Optane there. From a performance perspective, we're introducing capabilities called Compute Express Link, right? Where you really fundamentally shift the way computing is done, or distribution of computing is done, in essence, to give the performance and the cost that the customers are looking for.
Mahesh, just one more question. Technology is great. Technology has empowered the banks, but there is a cost angle that needs to be considered. What are the checks and balances that you are doing at Yes Bank to make sure that you meet the ROI, that the cost is kept under control?
Now, obviously, as we speed up our digital capabilities, as we speed up our entire ecosystem from our onboard service journeys, and deploy more and more capabilities in terms of straight-through integrations with partners, there is an element, there are two factors that need to come in play. One is build once, reuse a lot, which means that you can then use the power of scale to be able to drive more volumes and productize your entire game plan. It is not about creating the distinguishing factor is all about how well you package and product. So that is very important. The other piece is about risk. It is about making sure that you are upping your game from your risk and control perspective. Because as you scale here, you also need to make sure that you are well empowered and capable of managing and bringing in the right risk profiles to your organization. A combination of what we do as one-to-many, zero ops, and managing to keep your risks under control, I think will give us the profitability that we are really looking for, because that's going to help us scale as well as keep our costs under control and not just let it go haywire.
Gentlemen, it's an absolute pleasure listening to you here. Thank you very much for joining in.
Hewlett-Packard Enterprises and Intel present Byte Talks, powered by CNBC TV 18. Focus, ideate, innovate, enable.